the peace of mind that comes from the satisfaction of knowing you did your very best, right? And doing your very best doesn't mean, okay, let me take 2 weeks off and study and read 15 books and then come back and then I'll tell you the answer to the decision. Now it means, Eric, what are we going to do in the next 5 minutes with this resource? Of course, the real question was, how are we going to do this? So I started looking around. What are the tools that we have to do this? This won't work because it costs too much time. This won't work because it costs too much money. That won't work because it assumes trust. I just thought, well, what are the conditions that we need to fulfill if we're going to come up with this tool?
Something clicked in my mind when I was reading about STIR, which was the fact that living a good life and building a good business innovation is really about making the best decisions we can at any given point in time over our lifetime. And what makes STIR special for me is that it is about capacity building. So thinking about the way that you think, getting better at thinking about the way that you think, and recognizing the possible blind spots and biases we have and how those things are formed. And I think this particular skill is something they can carry on beyond your current project. And that's what's so special. You can use it in your daily life when you're watching the news, because you can, once you have that sort of thinking, then you can start looking at the information and information or news that other people produce and start thinking about, okay, what are the potential blind spots in other people's thinking? And this broader view helps one, in the end, make much better decisions. So yeah, that's why I found this process quite fascinating. And I'm wondering, how did you land in this direction? So we were talking about the challenges of responsible innovation. There's so many different ways to solve this problem, the problems and challenges. Why STIR?
Love the question. And I love what you just said, Xiao. That's really powerful. I just want to return to that because I agree that when you look back at the end of a project or an undertaking, an endeavor, a career, a lifetime, right? What matters is, as you said, you could analyze that. Did I make the right decisions along the way, right? But the trick is people have to understand that the right decision isn't like, oh, I chose door number 1 and that's the prize, yay, right? It's not what decision you make. It's how you make that decision, why you make that decision, and to some extent when you make that decision. But let's focus on how you make the decision, right? Do you make the decision in a way that's robust, that brings everything you know and everything you feel and everything you're focused on to bear in that moment? Well, then you're going to be successful. Even if you fail, you're going to be successful because you did your best. And you have what Brian Biro calls beyond success. You have the peace of mind that comes from the satisfaction of knowing you did your very best, right? And doing your very best doesn't mean, okay, let me take 2 weeks off and study and read 15 books and then come back and then I'll tell you the answer to the decision. Now it means, Eric, what are we going to do in the next 5 minutes with this resource? Okay, let me really bring my powers of focus to bear and say, this is really the best I can do. And I might dialogue for a second with whoever came to me, and then we're going to move forward. And I can have the satisfaction that I made the best decision I could under the circumstances with the limited information and the limited time that I had. Okay, and so again, that's why STIR and the dialogue process that it relies on, it enhances each of our own human capacities, partly because you've got somebody else to dialogue with, but partly because you've got the decision protocol that's going to analyze your decisions and help you just kind of spread it out and say, okay, am I thinking about this? What do I have to think about there? What about these two things? So I really like what you've said, because really it's how we make decisions that in the end, that's the best we can do anyway, right? So let's just increase our ability to say we've done our best. And that is a skill, that is a capacity that people can take with them after a STIR exercise, after a STIR coaching project, after a training workshop, right? They can carry it with them. You're building capacity And it's a mindset as well as a set of techniques. So I just wanted to speak to your idea, but I know that the question on the table is how did I get into STIR? Why STIR, and how did it get going?
Just pop your head. Uh,
I mean, it evolved. It evolved over time. I think I was always interested in bridging the gap between conflicting systems. Okay, so I've got a when I went to get my undergraduate degree, it's a double major in philosophy and mathematics, right? So I wanted to understand science and mathematics, but I also wanted to understand philosophy. And these, usually you just have to get one degree or the other. But fortunately, I found a place that allowed me to get both. Um, and so I've always been interested in this. I used to work for an engineering before I got my PhD. I was the humanities advisor for a college of engineering in the US. And so I spent a lot of my time talking to students, but I also spent a lot of my time talking to faculty, engineering faculty, and talking to engineering deans and their funders and their collaborators inside and outside of the university on how we can, what I was calling, humanize the engineering curriculum. Okay, so I think this was sort of naturally on my mind when I started the PhD program, but I was focused on US science and technology policy, and I was focused on nanotechnology at the time. It was 2003. And I like to say that it was divine dispensation because the US Congress passed an act called the 21st Century Nanotechnology Research and Development Act that mandated integrating societal considerations into R&D. And I did research on that for several years and found out that there's never been that kind of pronouncement before. In the past, we've always had these two things that are separate. We've had the promotion of science, technology, and innovation, right? Move fast, give the tax break, legitimize it. And then we've had the control, regulate it, ask questions about ethics, listen to the public, right? But we don't have ways to bring them together. And this is an insight that my Dutch colleagues came up with, Johan Schott and Ari Rip. These two tracks of promoting innovation and controlling innovation are separate and they don't talk to one another. The people don't talk to one another. The organizations don't talk to one another. And even within a company, in the same organization, the units, the offices don't talk to one another. They don't work collaboratively, so you don't get synergy. And so I saw that here's the US Congress saying, if you're going to get funded to do nanotechnology research from the US government, right? And we're talking about what quickly became $1 billion plus annual outlay just by the US government. There's even more coming from industry. Then you're required to do this kind of integration. So my next question was, okay, now I know that it's new, where did it come from? And I searched, why are policymakers talking about this? There's a whole story there. And then of course, the real question was, how are we going to do this? So I started looking around. What are the tools that we have to do this? Well, here's a tool. Oh, but that won't work because of this. Oh, there's a tool. Oh, but that won't work because of that. Oh, here's another tool. Oh, right. That won't work because it's all slow thinking. This won't work because it costs too much time. This won't work because it costs too much money. That won't work because it assumes trust, right? And so all the barriers that we were just talking about earlier to responsible innovation, in my mind, disqualified most of the tools. These are good tools for other things, but they're not good tools for on the ground, real-time integration of societal considerations, stakeholder concerns, long-term strategic values in the daily research, development, technology, and innovation work practices and workflows. Okay, so I thought I need to understand. I didn't set out to build a tool. I just thought, well, what are the conditions that we need to fulfill if we're going to come up with this tool, this process? And so I went into an engineering laboratory and I spent 3.5 years there, or 3 years there. And, people thought I was an engineer. I was totally embedded in the culture. But I did that so that I could really put myself in their shoes and say, what would help me integrate? And what wouldn't help me integrate? And what helps me integrate, does that help me do my job or does that slow me down in my job, right? And so it was really trial and error. And I collaboratively developed STIR with social scientists, with philosophers, with scientists and engineers, with the director of the lab, a great friend and colleague and partner of mine, Roop Mahajan, with his management team, with his graduate students. You know, we spent nearly 3 years collaborating, developing this tool, and then testing the tool. And I thought, well, it's just going to help me understand what the societal issues are, and then I'll advise them on a separate step. This is what you guys need to think about. But it surprised me, and it surprised the engineers, that in going through the process, this dialogue to map the decisions, it wasn't just a way to help me understand their decisions. It instantaneously gave them more intelligence about how they can be better decision makers. So that's why we call it enhancing human capacity, because the same process that helps me understand their practices and understand their capacities to do responsible innovation, that same process helps them enact responsible innovation, right? Do responsible innovation. So then all of a sudden, my mission in life changed. And instead of going down one track, I went down another track, and I developed STIR, and I've trained hundreds of people in the process. And I've really, you know, STIR wouldn't be where it was today if it wasn't for dozens of really smart, dedicated, creative individuals, many of whom were my PhD students, many of whom were PhD students around the world that I was fortunate to work with. Many of these people went on to become professors, tenured professors, or they work in academia, or they work in private sector. Some of them are entrepreneurs. So they're you know, just an international team of people who have helped develop and apply STIR. They've done their studies, they've written up the results, and they've published their results, and they shared the results back with me so that I could really understand how the whole thing is developing. So it was really a very organic process that started with novelty, realizing that what the US government was asking for, what policymakers were asking for, not just from university researchers, but also from private firms that were developing technology, that was something new, and that we had to develop something new in order to do it. And so in the process, even though I didn't really set out to do it, that was just sort of the organic result, as we developed a new way to fit this niche. And yeah, we haven't stopped. It's been over 10 years, and it just keeps getting more exciting and more effective.